Now let's talk about significance. The 95% critical values of the sample correlation coefficient table can be used to help you decide if the correlation coefficient R is significant or not. So if R is significant, then the line may be used for prediction. In order to use the table, you have to look in the left column, look up the degrees of freedom, n-2, where n is the number of data points. In the right column, look up the corresponding critical value. Use the critical value with the same sign as R. Compare the critical value in R. Positive R and positive critical value. If R is greater than the critical value, then the relationship between X and Y is significant. If you've got a negative R and a negative critical value, and if R is less than the critical value, then the relationship between X and Y is significant. Otherwise, the relationship between X and Y is not significant. So now let's take a look at some examples of identifying significance. In the first example, we have our R, our correlation coefficient, is 0.612, and there's 17 data points. First thing we need to do is calculate the degrees of freedom, which is the number of data points minus 2. So 17 minus 2 gives us 15. The critical value is 0.482, and we find that by looking at the chart at 15 and finding our critical value of 0.482. Since our R value, 0.612, is greater than the critical value of 0.482, the relationship between X and Y is significant. Now if we have the next example, we've got a negative correlation coefficient, then the critical value is also going to be negative when we calculate that. So first, the degrees of freedom, we're going to do 12 minus 2, which is 10. So we're going to come over here and find our critical value. Because we are dealing with a negative correlation coefficient, our critical value is going to be negative 0.576. And since negative 0.612 is less than negative 0.576, the relationship between X and Y is significant. In the last example, we're looking at an R correlation coefficient of 0.213, 6 data points, so 6 minus 2 is 4. We come up here to a critical value of 0.811. So since the R is between the negative and positive critical values, the relationship between X and Y is not significant. And what I want to stress here in this one, just in case you are asking yourself why, is because in the rules, if you look back on the previous slide, it has to be a positive R that's greater than the critical value for the relationship to be significant, and it has to be a negative R with a negative critical value where the R is less than the critical value. So because our R here is 0.213 and our critical value is greater than our R, and it's not negative, then we know that it's not significant. So if this is confusing to you, go back to the previous slide and take a look at those rules again. You may want to write them down in your notes because it's important to understand when something is significant and when it's not. Note that the 95% critical values of the sample correlation coefficient table is also in our textbook.